Gr- Greetings, Internet, and welcome to another mildly interesting episode of Real Debate. As always, I'm Kyle. Joining me this week, we have Jon
Hi.
and Nate.
Yo! We finally get an answer for the most meme question out there. What about the droid attack on the Wookiees?
That's right, today we're talking about the Battle of Kashyyyk. And honestly, despite this being a very short battle, it was like 2 minutes, 40 seconds in total of the movie. A lot happens in that time period, and a lot of it's very well done, surprisingly.
I mean, we are all Star Wars lovers, and it is great to do this fight. It is just magnificent. I love a lot of the aerial views that they do, beforehand, setting up the battle.
Yeah, it's good to see them actually portray the planet of Kashyyyk and give it a lot of detail to it. It's also probably one of the more, I guess, well done battles that Star Wars has done, where stuff actually kind of seems to make a little bit of sense.
Yeah, honestly, like, we haven't watched all the movies since we started this podcast, but I think this is the best battle of the entire movie series.
And we have definitely spent the most time researching stuff on this, and with all the love that goes into it, because we just absolutely love Star Wars, and it's good to see and be able to talk about.
We talked for nearly 40 minutes before this, just what happens in it.
Including the car ride over as well.
No, that's not including the car ride. That was a separate 40 minutes of talking.
Yeah.
Anyways, the battle begins with the Wookiees stupidly charging out of their trenches at an enemy that's assaulting out of water.
By the way, we love Star Wars, but
It is stupid.
we are going to tear it apart a little.
And immediately, the clones begin using overlapping fields of fire and using wheeled vehicles for once to rapidly transport troops to where they are needed.
The Juggernauts are just such beasts with their missiles going off.
And honestly, that's the best synopsis I got. It's very short.
Yeah. I mean, the droids come out of the water, and the Wookiees are, doing hit-and-run tactics with their aerial vehicles. The clones and the Wookiees, with their repeater blasters on the back of their aerial vehicles, are shooting down the gunships.
Bowcasters.
Well, I don't think it was a bowcaster necessarily in this
One of them
case.
had a bowcaster.
Yeah.
The other
Iconic.
thing that I would like to point out is the droids had a two-pronged assault. There was attacks from the air as well as the water, but I think ultimately, in my opinion, what kind of sealed the fate for the droids in this fight was air superiority, as the Wookiees' aircraft was actually a lot faster and more maneuverable than I think the droids anticipated them to be.
It was designed for atmosphere.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And the other thing that we need to look at is that the Confederacy, this wasn't their bulk force. They were planning on doing waves against the Republican Wookiee lines, and this was just the first wave that came to them. So this was to soften up their troops and hopefully their vehicles, but it seems like the Republic vehicles were not damaged whatsoever, but there were heavy trooper losses.
Yep.
Because we don't see a lot of battle droids themselves. We see a lot of the snail vehicles. I mean, we see a few skimmers that are coming in, and there are some spider droids that are in the background.
Yeah.
And I think that they're more so defensive, protecting their camp. So then the Wookiees and Republic don't go out and just take them out at their base.
Yeah, it seemed like the spider droids were almost kind of lying in wait and just kind of popped up out of the water when the assault began, which wasn't a half bad strategy, I feel, because they travel much slower. They probably had to sneak those up into a forward position before the assault began.
The spider droids are the giant ones. The smaller, I don't.
Those are the spider droids.
Okay.
I believe we covered this in episode 2. I didn't write down the droid titles from that one because...
Yeah. The big walker wants to fire the continuous laser, though.
Yeah, those ones, they probably also had to wait for those.
Mm-hmm. Those were not part of this assault. Because even 2 minutes in when Order 66 gets initiated, that's 75% of the way through the entire fight, because by the time that's happening, the fight's almost over, and the clones are already starting to de-escalate and search for survivors. So that leads more credence to that the CIS was going to do a wave assault.
Mm-hmm.
Just because I want to bring this up, they used overlapping fields of fire, which is an amazingly useful tactic. I mean, that was something that often was brought up in World War One. Is when you planned the defense, you made sure that you could support, another side of your flank. And yeah, this is kind of a very narrow area, but it's great that everything can fire straight into the kill zone.
Well, and the troopers were also taking place in the orchard trees and using the height advantage to just shoot down upon the droids as they were coming. So you could say that they had the high ground.
One of the things that I'd like to bring up that I think was a mistake on the droids' behalf, although I'm not entirely sure how it works on that planet, is that it was referred to a lagoon, even though it does look more like a sound. Is if there's varying tides there, I think the droids should have probably waited for the tide to be higher, coming at the trees to try to assault that place at the lower tide like that left too much of them exposed during the attack.
I remember looking at the tide charts of Kashyyyk for that fight, and it seemed like they were attacking at high tide.
Well, that's unfortunate for the droids.
Yeah.
Another problem with the droids is the treads on those snail takes are super exposed.
They just
Like
go
the-
right down the middle of the vehicle.
Yeah, where you would fire at a vehicle normally.
Yeah, and they weren't armored. There was no protection in the front of it. If they added a shield in the front of that, it would work a lot better.
Yeah.
'Cause the treads probably need to be balanced to maintain momentum across the water, because it's an amphibious assault vehicle. So I kind of get the placement of the treads. I mean, you could have two treads on the side, but I guess they were going with trying to make it cheaper for a single tread design.
Yeah.
But they should have had.
They did have two smaller treads on the side, and I don't know what those are exactly bringing to the vehicle, but
balance on the water.
Yeah.
More
they-
little pontoons.
You think that they could just put
But
a
this ultimately comes down to, why are these not hover vehicles?
Yeah,
they
they
have-
have hover tanks.
Yeah, they had skiffs as well. Why didn't they bring the tanks in? I know in I think it was Battlefront 1 or Battlefront 2, when you do this fight on the CIS side, there are the tanks there, but we're not talking about that. We're talking about the movie.
Then
Yeah.
why did you bring it up?
Because I'm trying to get an atmosphere of the battle and look at it as a whole rather than the real.
Yeah.
They actually used fortifications in this battle.
The Wookiees didn't. They got up and ran in front of it, but the Republic did.
Yeah. Well, and the tree itself was also a form of fortification.
I feel like the Republic would have a really hard time of controlling the Wookiee forces and talking to them when the Wookiees are in a battle frenzy as well, and that they were going to do their own thing, and the Republic was just going to work around that.
Yeah, well,
And
at least they put the Wookiees out front.
Yeah, and the Wookiees did quite a bit as well with, flying in and dropping troopers with bombs on them. I mean, that was working very well against the snail droids,
Oh, yeah.
and shooting down the gunships as well.
I'd call it guerrilla tactics, but they're obviously Wookiees.
Sasquatch tactics.
Yeah.
Did we mention using the vehicles to rapidly deploy troops where needed? Because
Yeah.
I don't.
Okay.
Did we?
Yeah, that was brought up in the beginning.
I know I did it in the synopsis, but
Yeah, and the droids are trying to do the same thing. They're both trying to bring forth troops as quickly as possible.
Yeah, from one of the aerial views that we see I think one or two skimmers coming up the side
Yep.
for them.
those had a carrying capacity of 120 droids each, assuming they could get the droids out and into position. Because, as we covered in episode 1, yeah, that's bright.
were they B1 or B2 battle droids?
B1,
Okay.
also known as the crappy ones.
The janitors.
You're right.
Well, because I think that they were originally.
I would
cleaning-
love to see a scene right out of Lord of the Rings, just a bunch of janitors with their mops and using them as pikes. And
Yeah, the big design flaw with those
Fire cleaning supplies over the walls.
They can use chemical warfare and use some bleach,
Yeah,
some
right.
some turpentine.
I don't know if I'm keeping this, but no, I'm keeping this. This is great.
Yeah, the big design flaw with those skimmers too is unlike the troop transports from the episode 1, these ones aren't heavily armored either. So as they're bringing up the troops, they're exposed in the where they're all stored in the unload thing.
Yeah. Again, I think this was just a chance for the CIS to attack and deplete some of their troop forces rather than because it didn't seem like they had anti-vehicle weaponry at all brought with them. I think the snail droids, they have some explosive that goes with it, but other than that, it wouldn't deal much damage.
One of the things that I kind of wonder too about for the Republic side is they had that big battleship in the background that actually had line of sight to where the battle was taking place. Couldn't they have turned some of the weapons on that to fire at the droids?
I think there was enough trees in the way that they couldn't, but you would think that it would be elevated enough and that they could lower the guns enough that they could have.
Yeah, I mean they have full range of movement and fire when they're in space, so I don't see why it wouldn't be able to work. Unless, of course, maybe they were worried about backlash from the weapons being too powerful in that tight of an area.
I'd assume there's probably something to do with
Firing.
We've already assumed that the Republic has good anti-air,
Yeah,
which is why the airborne droids are coming in low. We could very easily assume that the droids also have anti-air, and the elevation that would get, it would just start getting pounded. And I mean, it might not be strong enough to immediately destroy the ship, but it would be taking a heavy pounding within a very short amount of time.
Yeah, I'm surprised that they don't do an orbital bombardment on the Venator that's on the planet as is, because then they could take that out.
I think that was parked right in front of the objective they wanted. So
yeah, it was directly behind the Warshar Tree City that the Wookiees have, or the trading city.
Yeah, the Kashyyyk. So that is something to bring up as well, is the droid's objective here. And that was to capture some of the refineries that were there because they desperately needed it for the war. This wasn't a, we're going to bombard the refinery and then build it up over a few years. This was a key facility that they wanted on their side, along with taking control of the hyperspace lanes that were around Kashyyyk leading into Corellia and other places. And
Yeah, and that's the main trade port on Kashyyyk for ships traveling in and out of the system.
yeah, especially with the refineries right there as well.
Yeah.
Because I was reading up on some of the information, and it was saying that after this battle specifically, that the droids were able to take one of the facilities, but by then Darth Vader had already killed off the Separatist leaders, and the droid army was shut down.
another great thing is the ATAP, which was the medium-sized walker. It actually had a mass accelerator cannon on it.
Those things are tank killers.
Yep. And it had a wide enough foot base to actually be able to walk around in the sand and not just sink in or topple over.
It also had a modification of where they had 3 legs instead of 2.
Yep.
So a slightly better balance and not having to worry as much with working in sand, because sand can be fickle.
Oh, yeah.
I hate sand. It's coarse and rough. It gets everywhere.
Yeah, and the troop carriers for the Republic had wide enough tires on them that they were able to
Yeah.
easily navigate the terrain as
Um,
well.
And there were at least 6 of those that you could see in the scene, and each of those could carry a minimum, or a maximum, I should say, of 200 troops.
You must put 200 troops in here in order to move.
But I mean, that is a ridiculous amount of troops that you can just redeploy the second you need to.
Yeah,
Yeah.
they don't take forever to get out like the droids.
And another thing is that the Republic chose an amazing spot to defend, because basically on both sides where it was just enough tree roots and whatnot that
There was an
any
entire
droid that went through would get pretty shredded. And
there was a seawall on one side as well.
Yeah.
That was easy to defend as well. Yeah, and one of the things I wanted to bring up was the vehicle diversity as well, because as we see in our modern military, the more diversified and unique to handle situation vehicles, the better. And so the Republic, they just kind of got there with their Venator, I think. So they were just rapidly transporting, and they have their the Juggernaut, the AT-APs, and whatnot, and all the Wookiee vehicles, which worked very well in the defense of the planet. While on the other side of the CIS, they had, 3 or 4 vehicles, and it didn't seem...
4, yeah.
Yeah.
And their airships are not very maneuverable or fast compared to what the Wookiees had.
Yeah, and they weren't using any long-range artillery either.
Nope, at least not in that scene.
Yeah. Does it ever go into why they don't use artillery bombardment on this location? They just didn't have it, or
I'm not aware of any reason they weren't using it. I mean, shields are always a thing.
I think it probably had more to do with just how fast they could deploy. From what we've seen with the hover tanks that the droids use in the previous movies, they're not exactly very quick, and moving over the water like that, they would be greatly exposed to air attacks, and they can't really travel under the water like the amphibious assault vehicles did.
Mhm.
So I think what they were going for was their light, fast vehicles to get to the beach as quickly as possible instead of trying to bring in the heavy armaments, because they would have just got taken out in the water before they even got there. They might be coming in like a second wave. This is more of like a distraction just to try to set up a position that could be defensible on the beach to try to get to the city. But
they already had a base of operations on the other side, so why can't they set up over there and fire? But like Kyle brought up, is shields is always the thing, and as we saw in episode 1, that the droids got into the shields and took them out, so then they could fire in their heavy weapons.
yeah, exactly.
And we don't see a lot of the CIS side, which just means that we have to conjecture what was there and probably what we would do in that case, but we're not droids.
Well, the droids have never been particularly smart at what they do.
And did we bring up the fact that the Wookiees were using their airborne vehicles to hit the flanks of the droids immediately as the fight was starting? Because that's a classic tactic right there of basically cavalry into the enemy's flanks while they're focusing on the main front.
Well, like I said, that's mainly what won that battle, was air superiority.
Yeah.
The Wookiees definitely had air superiority with their vehicles and those weird dragonfly monsters that they were riding around on.
Yeah.
Wookiee Special Forces.
Well, yeah. And so you think of those 2 Wookiees that we see in the scene when they're planting the bombs and they jump off into the water. That must be either really deep water and the explosion happened very quickly. And I know Wookiees are very resilient, but it's almost like they're suicide bombers at that point.
I mean, I'm pretty sure they were okay. The concussion definitely would not have felt good, but being a surface explosion like that, if it is deep enough water, and they are pretty heavy, I don't imagine they float super well.
Yeah, I guess it could be shaped explosives as well to blow up inwards more than outwards.
Yeah.
So that would make sense.
Well, and the biggest thing they were doing was just taking out the drive motors on the vehicles, and that way they're stuck out in the water and they can't do much, turn around or maneuver their weapons.
Yeah.
And last thing I have, and this is just a nitpick, but that stupid droid at the beginning that's going, charge! Why?
He's the battle standard droid. He's for inspiration.
They don't need morale for them, though.
One thing that always kind of seemed interesting is it seemed like most of the CIS vehicles and weaponry were designed to be piloted by people, not just droids. So it seems like they were multifunctional. I'm not sure if that was like a design purpose, like they planned to sell the vehicles to the people that didn't have droids, I don't really get why they designed the droids to drive and pilot them. As we said before, why aren't they all just automated weapons?
Well, I think they learned from the first movie where if you take out a centralized location, then it's not all shut down. But I can't actually say that because when Darth Vader shuts them all down on Mustafar, so
Yeah,
my point is very moot.
yeah. Well, and the only other thing that I could think of is the purpose of the charge droid is perhaps he's some type of a communications droid.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe he's just there operating like a communications panel or something.
On the outside of the leading vehicle.
Yeah, I mean, not a good placement for it. I'm trying here, man.
We're trying very hard.
Maybe he's a spotter droid. He's just there spotting targets. I'm not 100%.
So that's it for my notes. Do either of you have any more things you want to bring up in this battle?
Maybe not the battle, but this is a funny little tidbit. So Kia Mundi, the guy who said, "What about the droid attack on the Wookiees?" is the same. He plays two roles in these films. He also plays Viceroy Newt Gunray.
Oh, same actor.
Yeah. So he is the one who's leading the charge against the Wookiees, and then questions it in the Jedi Council. Maybe this guy has been Snoke the entire time. That's why he has that scar, is because he removed a lot of his forehead.
Yeah, right.
It's like the guy with the long neck who put on a fake mustache and became a cafeteria worker in the Death Star.
Matt.
Oh, we're just going on with the Robot Chicken references today, aren't we?
Yeah, apparently.
So, yeah, that's the last of my notes. Nate, what would you rate the battle? What would you give the Republic?
I mean, solid A for them. I mean, they went above and beyond. They worked with the Wookiees, despite them, having clear communication problems, because I don't know how the clones would understand for that. So them working around that, taking the high ground and working with what they have. And it actually was Yoda who determined that the Republic should take a stand there rather than do hit and run tactics. So anything that could be said against them is more so on him. For the CIS, I mean, give them maybe C+, B-, because they're going in waves, they're expendable troops, and that's what they're there for.
All right, John, what would you give them?
I think I'm going to break it up into three different grades here. I'm going to give the droids, I'm going to give them a C, just because of while they were trying to make a blitz attack, and they had like some forward positions, like those little spider droids seemed like they had to be put up beforehand. I just don't think that their timing was very good on the attack, and also I don't think that they properly utilized their resources, and just overall kind of bad design. They're possibly could have used their airborne droids a little more efficiently as well during the attack, sticking more to the high targets and distracting the people who were firing from above instead of trying to fire on the beach, from what it looked like. The Republic, I will give a B, just because they seemed like they were rushing into positions, and they did a pretty good job of getting up there and staying behind defensible positions, but they ultimately didn't really bring a whole lot to the battle. From that perspective, I mean, the missile fire was really good as like an artillery support. And the Wookiees, I have to give an A. As I don't really think that they deserve to be lumped in with the Republic. I think that they, on their own, probably could have won that battle, just based off of their air superiority and tactics that they were using. They may not have as good of guns, but I think ultimately the only thing the Wookiees did bad was rush out of the defensible position right from the beginning. But beyond that, solid job from the Wookiees.
I mean, A being above and beyond.
Yeah. I mean, just the knowledge of using what they have and their terrain and stuff like that, and their strengths and weaknesses, the Wookiees definitely seem to have a good advantage there, in my opinion. And if anything, the only thing I could think of for why they rushed out of the positions from the get-go was to try to stop the droids from being able to land at all. get right up there, and when the skiffs come in with the troop transports, take them out right off. Hop on there and start ripping droids apart.
I think that the Wookiees charged them because they wanted to rip the arms off the droids. You should always let the Wookiee win.
Yeah.
I will give the Republic an A, because I think they did just about everything right. They were moving troops where they needed. They had artillery getting in place. They were moving up things where needed and overlapping fields of fire. You cannot go wrong with that. I will give the droids an F, though, because while this might have been the first wave, it's the only wave we saw and the only one that ever went through. So ultimately, it was a waste of resources on their part. They got virtually no gains and just lost a lot of vehicles in the process.
You're so harsh.
I am harsh. It's almost like I play tactical games a lot.
It does seem like with the two forces charging against each other, it did seem almost like a tabletop game.
Yeah.
It's like played in real time.
Well, and assaulting a beach, period, is not an easy task. You're always at a disadvantage.
Yeah.
Basically, you're either an A or an F. You either succeed miraculously or fail horribly when it comes to beach assaults.
Yeah. And a lot of this scene is like reminiscent of Normandy, except for in this case it would be the Germans being actually prepared for the assault, and could have gone much differently if that was the case, but because of the great tactics and misinformation that the Allies used in World War II.
Never forget, we had an entire battalion of inflatable tanks.
Yeah, they even put our best general, leading that charge because he was mouthing off against his superiors, and they're like, "There's no way that." The Germans were like, "There's no way that they would sideline him this late and important step of the war," but
Yep.
we did. 6th of June, 1944.
All right, does that about wrap it up?
Yeah, so what do you think? Leave a comment below. Are we blithering idiots? Did we miss something? Are we on track? What do you think?
You sound like that kid from Stranger Things.
I think that's the perfect sign-off.
Yep.